Good evening and welcome to the CBS6 special, A System Under Siege, Fight for Prison Reform. I am Tom Eschen.
And I'm Brianna Supardi. Tonight we bring together 6 voices representing the corrections community, inmate safety advocates, as well as lawmakers to hopefully have a real and productive discussion on the state of New York's prison system.
Now, as we know, these issues are very complex. There's a couple different major issues that's happened in the last few months that have brought us here today. You had the beating death of Robert Brooks. You had another death that that we have reportedly heard much about in terms of at the Mid-State Correctional Facility there as well. And then the massive statewide strikes of corrections officers calling for protesting, calling and saying that they're working under dangerous and unworkable conditions at this time.
So beyond the headlines, beyond the chants and the finger pointing, we're here to ask what's really happening inside New York's prison and what needs to change.
And we do that today with a roundtable of 6 individuals that are so invested in this right now and personally impacted as well. We will start today's discussion with everybody just introducing themselves, who you are, and why you're here. We'll go around the table this way, right to left.
I'm Bernadette Singer. I am the wife of a correction officer. I have been a leading advocate for the correction officers strike, and I also have a group that I started for wives of correction officers.
My name is Patrick Stevens. I'm a leadership fellow at the Center for Community Alternatives. I am a formerly incarcerated person. I served 24.5 years of a 25 to life sentence. I came home in May of 2022, came home to do this advocacy work and to support incarcerated people on the inside, and as well to promote a lot of the reforms that we think are important.
I'm Scott Gray, member of the New York State Assembly. I represent Northern New York, Jefferson, and St. Lawrence County. So I've been very involved in this whole prison issue as of late, and really trying to focus on some of the solutions that are, puzzling the whole system, and what some of the answers are to overall system reform.
I'm Emily Gallagher. I am an Assembly member from Brooklyn. I grew up outside of Rochester, New York, and I became very passionate about this issue after visiting Rikers Island and seeing the conditions there. And I am here to really discuss all the ways that we need to reform the prison system overall.
My name is Nate Yando. I am now a former correctional officer with the state. I was with the state for 18 years. I resigned March 7th just because the prison system is a mess.
My name is Melanie Bishop. I'm the mother of a currently incarcerated child. I grew up in rural New York, so in a very law and order community. I had family and friends who were correctional officers, and I like to say I was blissfully ignorant of all the problems within the system and what is experienced by human beings within the system. And so I have joined the Center for Community Alternatives to kind of work on some of those reforms to make the prison safer for both those who live and work there.
Right, and we thank you all for being here today. And we're going to get the discussion going right now with this big question here, and we're going to start with you. What do you think is wrong with New York's prison system?
So according to a lot of the correction officers that I've personally spoken with, and also a formerly incarcerated individual, I think that the important thing to note is that we are seeing destruction in the HALT bill. From the time that it started, and I have charts that show a surge in violence, a surge in contraband, and that is something that's impossible to ignore.
So for me, I think it's really important that our prisons supply a lot more programming opportunities for people who are incarcerated. It's very clear empirically that the safest prisons, the safest spaces within prisons are those that have significant programmatic opportunities, college programming, significant training programs, prisoner-led organizations that develop and address the needs of incarcerated people, that maintain safe spaces because they want to maintain their autonomy. And so for me, it's really important to think about, not just isolated incidents, but when you're thinking long-term and when you're thinking about policy, what are the things that are known to create safety, and how do we promote more of those things?
I think that's an excellent point. It's all about safety, right? It's about safety of not only the staff that's in these facilities, that is the uniform staff, that's the non-uniform staff. We have a lot of other people that do programming in these facilities. So it's about safety, and it's about safety for the incarcerated individual as well. So we have a deteriorating system right now that is largely attributed to HALT. And, you know, and really, it is increasingly becoming dangerous in these facilities because there's no disciplinary alternatives in these facilities. And when that starts, you know, it's becoming increasingly weaponized, right? And that's a lot of that's out of self-preservation, right? So an incarcerated individual is just simply trying to maintain their protection in those facilities. So we really have to focus on contraband, and we have to focus on individual safety in these facilities. And part of that is done with programming, right? Higher education helps in these facilities. There's a lot of different means that we can implement, as well as some of the safety concerns that were expressed during the strike. Some of the, some reform to HALT would be certainly beneficial, and some programming as well. Higher education.
I think the prison system as a whole is built on a culture of violence, and I think it's almost impossible to extract the violence without totally reforming the entire way that we do things there. In 1974, we saw with the Stanford prison experiment that as soon as you set up this separation of corrections officers and incarcerated people, violence starts to percolate and control issues start to percolate. They had to stop that simulation after only 6 days because the violence became so bad with college students. And I think what we've seen as legislators trying to reform the system and bring in these national and internationally regarded alternatives that actually help people build back the things that are broken, the opportunities, the sense of self, the social connections, that those programs are going to be what actually is able to change the system. And actually, in its written form, HALT is one of those programs. HALT does not prevent people from being put in solitary confinement. It just limits who can do that, including people with mental health issues. And it also says that you can only put people in solitary for 15 days. I met a man yesterday who was in solitary confinement for 15 years. That breaks you. It is internationally recognized as torture, and we cannot be torturing people and expect them to heal.
Just to jump on what she just said, the word solitary confinement, I don't believe that word is applicable to what is happening in the state of New York. The box, the shoe, they're regular cells, just like every other cells. They got a man to the left, man to the right. There's nothing solitary about their confinement. That being said, I believe that the problem nowadays is there's an uptick in violence towards staff, and there's an uptick in violence towards incarcerated individuals. And I feel that it's because there's no repercussions for that. I've witnessed personally that two incarcerated individuals can get in a fight, they get sent back to their rooms, and then they're out for chow the next time. And they could meet in the chow hall. There's no deterrent for violence in prison anymore, which doesn't make staff feel safe, and it doesn't make incarcerated individuals feel safe. If I'm an incarcerated individual and some guy punches me, then we both go back to our cells or our dorms, and then we're out for chow, and I could see him again. Maybe I'll get assaulted again.
That's a very valid point. I'm going to jump in because that's exactly what some of the reform of HALT needs to do. It needs to separate. You really need to have a cooling period, and you really need to have a separation.
And that's why I feel that there's an uptick documented in violence. If I punch somebody in the street, my life is turned upside down. I'm getting arrested, I'm getting in trouble. In prison, these incarcerated, they're there because of whatever they did in the street. There needs to be that kind of rule in prison.
We'll hold it right there. Melanie and Patrick, I think you both want to respond to that. We do have to take a break. When we come back, we'll have those responses, and we'll continue this conversation specifically about the HALT Act as well, which I think everyone has brought up at this point. Stay with us. Welcome back to our CBS6 special, A System Under Siege, Fight for Prison Reform. We left off here just a moment ago, and we have more perspectives to get to about what this conversation is regarding and trying to find not maybe some common ground, but at least continue this conversation around prison reform. We left off with Melanie Bishop, and of course, you heard Nate talk a bit about his experience as a CO in the last few months. You have someone that's incarcerated, a loved one yourself. What have you heard from them?
Well, I kind of want to address a couple different things that everybody has pointed out. So I think that while we're talking about the humane alternatives to long-term incarceration, so I think when we use the term HALT, sometimes that segues a little bit away from what we're talking about. So it's not necessarily solitary confinement, as Nate pointed out, but it's long-term confinement. And we do know that it hasn't been implemented to its fullest as it was intended, based on lawsuits and everything else like that has happened. But there was a lot of discussion about contraband and programming, and I think we do have a way to address some of these safety issues, and it's to stop housing people who no longer need to be incarcerated. We have people that have completed programs that are serving long sentences that have no way of reducing that sentence to come back to their communities, to contribute to their communities sooner. And that's why I support the Earned Time Act. It's legislation in Oklahoma and Alabama, places that are usually Republican-led, and it gives our incarcerated individuals an opportunity to earn their way home sooner by completing programs, and that opens up the staffing shortage and the staffing issues to be able to offer programming for the higher needs individuals that may need to have extensive programming in these alternatives to long-term confinement. I work in education. I'm a teacher. We have Tier 1 levels, we have Tier 2 levels, we have Tier 3 interventions. And if we can begin to pass laws like the Second Look Act, where we can have judges review people's sentences and determine if they're eligible to come home sooner, if we can have laws like the Earned Time Act passed this year that allows people to have access to programs, which actually gives them hope, which gives them a motivation instead of a consequence to behave themselves, then I think we have the path towards making the prison facilities safer. And we address those issues like contraband and discipline.
I did want to ask Patrick to respond to what Nate had to say. He had his description of what solitary confinement as seen as. He said it wasn't really that. From your experience, I believe you were there a bit for the beginning of HALT. You were incarcerated, or you're around that time. How would you describe it compared to what you said?
So several things. So one, when we're talking about solitary confinement, as Emily has pointed out, by international standards, it is considered torture. People who are in SHU for extended periods of time are known to have sensory deprivation, to have psychological breakdowns. When you look at places like Southport or some of these box places, these are the places where you see incarcerated people breaking down and not really faring well under those circumstances. If you could just imagine, just think about what it was like for people during the lockdown under COVID. People were losing their minds when they were there in their own apartments, let alone inside a small, tiny cell with little to do, with little to think about. That's number one. Number two, what we do know about human beings in general and motivation is that people respond much better to positive reinforcement than to negative consequences. And so when we talk about things like the Earned Time Act, the Second Look Act, we're thinking about legislation that will promote a culture inside of the prisons where people are thinking about what opportunities can I find so that I can avail myself of these opportunities, so that I'm not thinking about not going to SHU, but I'm thinking about what are my prospects for when I come home from prison. The other point that's very important to make, it is an incredible misnomer to suggest that HALT is there to stop violence. To be clear, 80% of the people who go to SHU are there for nonviolent offenses. In the 24 and a half years that I was incarcerated, I have seen people go to SHU for possession of marijuana, things like having pictures that approximate a gang sign. I have seen a student in a higher education program be put into the box because he wrote a fiction paper that the authorities thought was inappropriate in a fiction class and was sent to the box for this. So these are the things that we're talking about that we're sending people to the box for. And again, when you put someone in the box and expect them to comport with rules, you're asking for a miracle. You can't torture someone and then ask them to comport or conform to any rules.
He said that people got put in SHU for marijuana. Not legal. It's wrong. Gang signs, gang violence, and gangs are a big deal in prison. Again, not following the rule of law. You mentioned about a guy that you know that spent 15 years in the box because he did not follow the rules. If you get in a fight, if an incarcerated gets in a fight, they get 90 days, 60 days, depending on whatever. Then they get released. And if they do it again, they get more box time. Or if they expose themselves, or if they do drugs or whatever in the box, then they're gonna continue their sentence in the box. It's all about, you break the rules, you get penalized.
I really would like to add on to that.
We do. Bernadette has. We will in a moment here. Emily, Bernadette does have a response from our last segment.
Yeah, I
so
just
real
actually
quick.
wanted to touch on what she said. The HALT bill not being fully implemented. I've heard that a few times as far as corrections not being maybe implementing. I mean, I do have state collected data here, which is a graph that shows that the since the implementation of HALT, the surge in violence on incarcerated individuals to incarcerated individuals, it has gone up so much, as well as the incarcerated individuals on staff. Even if it was being implemented at 50%, we would see some improvement. If I was driving my car and my brakes were 50% working, you know, would it slow me down or would it speed me up? If it speeds me up, I'm going to question the entire system. That to me does not feel like a failure of execution. It feels like a failure of the design.
I want to respond to both, about the rule following and stuff like that. As a mother of an incarcerated son who requested medical assistance, mental health assistance last Easter, requested suicide assistance, and was probably yelling out, probably not behaving appropriately, but did not assault an officer, and was assaulted by 6 correctional officers on suicide watch in a facility while he was undressed, unclothed, not a danger. I think we have to understand that prison impacts people on both sides. We saw it with the Robert Brooks murder. We saw it with, you know, the Messiah Nantwi. We've seen it coming out more and more and more. And I think that if we are just looking at HALT, or we're just looking at one specific law or issue, we're not addressing the real issues, which is the systemic violence and not following the rules on both sides, whether you're in blue or green. And that is a problem that we all need to get on board to fix. And I think some of that is sending some people home sooner.
I know everyone has more to say. Stay with us.
Welcome back to our CBS6 special, System Under Siege, Fight for Prison Reform. Assemblymember Gallagher, we're going to start off with you. And we were talking about a few issues here. What was your response?
I was hearing a lot of conversation about the rule of law and people breaking rules. And I just want to remind us that all of this re-up of the conversation around prison reform and safety began when Robert Brooks was murdered by 14 corrections officers that was caught on standby mode on a body camera. That means that that was not intentionally recorded. It happened in the infirmary, and you can see on that video how casually it's being done. And I happen to know that 143 people died in incarceration last year. And part of my research is looking into, why are people dying in prison? There's a case of a man named Terry Cooper who was claimed to have died by natural causes. His family insisted on an autopsy, and what they found was that he was beaten to death. I think if we're going to talk about the rule of law, we have a serious problem with certain corrections officers acting out and committing murder in these facilities,
And they
which
should
is
be
a
brought
huge
to
problem.
justice.
That's right. So let me just say,
My response is that 100%, whatever correction officers were involved in
Absolutely.
Robert Brooks should be brought to justice.
Absolutely.
Absolutely, 100%.
Yes.
That said 14, 11, I don't know the numbers, but absolutely, whoever was involved in that, there was 13,000 of us that saw that video.
They do not
and we
speak
were
for 13,000 people.
appalled
And there was
by
not
that
13,000 people standing in solidarity
video.
with any of those correction
That
officers.
is terrible.
So let me just say, nobody condones that type of behavior.
100% no.
But the system was broken long before Robert Brooks, right?
We've
Long
been begging
before-
for years
That's
for
right.
help.
The system has been broken. It is undeniable that violence in prisons has risen since HALT was put in place. It's undeniable. I mean, the facts are there, right?
It's been rising since 2018, 2019.
I just want-
Absolutely.
But I think-
and that is violence on staff. That's violence on other incarcerated individuals. So it's supported. So really,
Staff
so
violence
we're
towards
not sitting here.
incarcerated
We're not sitting
individuals.
here because the system is working perfectly. We're sitting here discussing a system that is in turmoil, right?
But here's the problem. There's a distinction between making a correlation between two things and assuming that that is a causation. Implementing HALT, not having HALT, has nothing to do with violence. And I think the other thing to think about, if we're really talking about safety, the way that you get safety for everyone is transparency.
Yes.
So when we asked for body cams, we would never have known about Robert Brooks were it not for the body cams. And the other important point that I think people are missing is that not only did this happen, a thing that none of us condone, but it happened in a way in which these officers were willing to falsify the records about what actually happened. So even when we talk about the statistics that we have about the amount of assaults, we have to seriously question the validity of some of these reports, right? Because I know for a fact, I have seen multiple times, there have been numerous lawsuits about officers who will falsify reports, who will claim that they were assaulted, and I am willing to bet that as this trial proceeds, that we will find out that officers falsified the reports in a way to suggest that Robert Brooks either assaulted them or did something
And
wrong.
additionally,
So let me just-
assault.
But to my point is that if we can trade anecdotes and say who's committing violence
Right.
against who, but what's really
Understand.
important is if we really want to know, provide for
We can't
transparency,
base
provide for
the whole thing.
transparency,
I am
body
with you.
cams,
I am with you.
incentivize people.
Transparency is
transfer-
100%. Transparency 100%. Put the body cams on. Put cameras on in other places.
Yeah.
Right?
Gray
Put
Meadow
people-
was
put
all
people under
camered up
cameras in other
before
places.
we even had body
Increase the
cams.
transparency. Increase the record keeping.
Yes.
All of those things need to be done.
We're all good
in
with that.
order. Right. There's no better way to get everybody to behave as they should be. That includes incarcerated people and staff. If you have full transparency, I agree.
And that's
Well,
not
the
being
great
debated.
news-
There has to be reform to HALT. There has to be reform to contraband. Contraband is
Rampant.
the number one issue in the facilities that is causing violence. It is, right? And it's undetectable things like K2 and synthetic drugs that are coming in. There are easy measures to implement in order to control contraband in these
Just
facilities.
bit by
The
bit, we gotta
greatest-
fix it.
The
Bit by
greatest
bit.
opportunity that I'm having a little bit of a difficulty with the timeline of how everything's happened, because Senator Salazar and Senator Salazar proposed a package of transparency reforms that include an ombudsman for the prison system so that grievances go to the ombudsman. There's a number of other reforms in there that are all about transparency, which we agree, bipartisan here, that we support. But after that package was proposed, that's when the strike started.
Absolutely not.
And to me,
Absolutely
that
not.
is when
I've never even heard.
This is a culmination. This is a culmination of years.
I started the Wives Group of New York State last year when we were starting peaceful rallies. We've held so many rallies, so many protests. The union was sending in they were sending in paperwork grievances. We were writing personal letters to the governor herself. I have documented my personal letters that I've sent. It was when Commissioner Marticello told the correction officers that 70% is the new 100% as far as staffing. They're already so understaffed. The officers love the programs. They love that, you know, the idea of actually rehabilitating incarcerated individuals. The problem is that they're not staffed enough to run those programs. So if you have several officers running our RRU, and something happens with an incarcerated individual in that housing unit, and maybe there's an attack or maybe there's an assault, 2 officers go out, you have to pull officers from other sides of the facility to sort of compensate for them being down there, and now maybe that officer that came from the other side of the facility is running packages. Now incarcerated individuals are getting upset because their packages aren't,
And I believe
coming
that
to them,
was
and
the catalyst
there's a lot of things.
for the strike, because when that 70-30 memo came out, it showed us as staff that Albany doesn't get it, they're not listening to us, and they don't care.
And this comes after.
That was the catalyst.
This comes after corrections officers are working 24, 32.
Right.
I have a friend that
I don't
worked
think
40
anyone
hours.
should work that much.
40 hours
But that's
straight.
what they were
But
doing to us.
I'm actually hearing some common ground here. So, like,
100%.
as a mother who has somebody who's in the facility right now, I'm hearing that correctional officers support programming, that we believe that programming should happen. I'm hearing that we have contraband issues within our facilities. So what I'm hearing is that I would love for Assemblymember Gray to support the Earn Time Act, to promote programming, to allow people to earn their way home sooner, to get out of our facilities so we can actually support the correctional officers who are having to cover other places, because I agree that does happen and everything, and we can get behind these bills that allow people who have done programming, committed programming, and are just being housed and taking up staff to come home.
Show me data that supports that there's not recidivism on that, and that
we have it.
On that, because I support higher education in prisons, right? Wrote an op-ed on it, right? And I think programming, and that does a number of things. One, it reduces recidivism, right? Once they're released from prison. And 2, it keeps them on good behavior, right? It keeps everybody
That's a big thing.
That's right. It is huge.
That's a
It
big
is
thing.
huge.
It's the hope.
But there
Right.
should be equal hope. Like you should, if I'm an incarcerated and I just put my head down, I do my programs, I'm just there, I committed the crime, okay, I'm here,
Right.
and I do good, I should get rewarded.
That's right.
However,
Absolutely.
if I do bad, there should be repercussions.
Alternatives, right?
So-
And that
One
is,
of the-
and we can look at how people are housed,
Yes.
but they're separated from society for a reason,
Yes.
right? And then when you're in the facility and you're still a bad actor, with all due respect, I guess.
Well, just like the Marcy, they're bad
you're
actors.
separated. You're separated from general population.
But you're
for a
you're
reason.
still not in solitary in some basement. You're
correct.
in a cell
The
next
HALT
to
program is not offering alternatives. It is simply eliminating consequences. I spoke with a former incarcerated individual, and he told me himself, there are so many people that do want to be rehabilitated. I had 2 brothers that were in prison, and I would have been more afraid for them to be amongst those facilities with the organized crime and gang violence than I ever would have with correction officers. And I do believe that the people that simply do not care to be rehabilitated are the same people that refuse to go to programs,
Right.
and they use the HALT bill as a loophole
Yep.
to continue their gang violence and and the extortion of other incarcerated individuals that do want to be rehabilitated.
And now
that is something
they're
huge that we
exploiting.
have to look
They're
at.
exploiting
And I
the
know
body.
There's been a lot of recent events here these past few weeks. I mean, what is your thoughts on the governor's response to, the Robert Brooks death, to the prison strike? How do you think she handled it?
I think she handled it, which I can't believe I'm saying that. She handled it okay.
Which one?
Which part?
I'm not into politics a lot, but I think she exposed I think she said the names before they were actually indicted. Like she didn't, like obviously nobody's gonna condone what they did, and
Right.
she could persecute them fullest extent of the law, which is great. However, how she handled this strike is vastly different.
Yeah.
She was just, for lack of a better term, just mean. She didn't. She didn't tell her commissioner to talk to us in good faith.
Yeah.
She fired 2,000 of us and said, "You'll never work for New York State again. I won't forget that."
No
that does
other
not-
government. No,
Right. So
you
that
can't.
doesn't
Civil
mean,
service.
Right, and that doesn't mean just because we walked out for unsafe working conditions and the 70-30 memo was huge.
That was what caused it.
It doesn't mean that we're bad employees. We still have skills and we still have stuff that we can contribute. It means that we were fed up with the conditions that we were working on, both for us and the incarcerated.
Patrick, I believe I have a response.
I want to go back to several things. So there is some confusion about how staffing occurs. And I've been in facilities where I've seen officers work very long shifts, get stuck. It's not appropriate. The problem for me is looking at the numbers, right? So when you look at the numbers of incarcerated people towards the end of the 90s, we're talking about 72,000 incarcerated people, right? At that time, there were approximately, 24,000?
I have a
22,000
good graph for you.
corrections officers? That is a ratio of
Yeah,
about 3
when I
to 1.
started in '07, I think we had 30-something thousand.
Okay, so that's a ratio of about 3 to 1, a little bit less. Currently, we have, 33,000, 34,000 incarcerated people?
Yep.
And about 13,000, maybe 14,000
Well, now it's
officers?
10,000.
Yep.
Now it's
Well,
10,000.
now, but I'm saying,
Yes.
prior to the
It was
issues that we're talking
13,000.
about, we're talking about 13 to 15,000. That's a lower ratio, which is far better than what you see nationwide.
But there's
so that's
more
one point.
programming and
here's-
mental health.
But here's the
that
issue.
Each of those programs take up officers, which is a good thing.
Which is a good thing, right?
Well,
Because we
don't
know
have
that
the-
those are the things that promote
Right.
more safety. Those are the ones that you don't really need to worry about. So the confusion for me is that how is it that we have a better ratio of officers to incarcerated people, notwithstanding reassigning people to program spaces, but we can't manage? I don't understand that.
And that
We
is
don't have
a
a better
problem.
ratio.
And
And this
say
is
there's
state-collected
10,000 or
data.
13,000
Look at how many
correction officers. There's 13,000 correction officers. How many are incarcerated right now?
33,000.
Look about
33,000.
So
33,000.
1 to 3 ratio, right? So right now,
It's even
we
better than
have,
that.
We have,
It's about 2.5.
Okay, so but we have more programs for the incarcerated, which takes up more officers. If it was like back in the 90s, where we can just
Put them in a dorm.
put them in a dorm and just walk back and forth.
Here's the other point.
Real
to
quick,
that.
real quick, real
I do
quick.
have one
Let's
quick
just,
follow-up.
Let me just
we
say.
have only like 2 minutes to go before we have to get out of here. Just make sure the governor's response.
Yeah.
Can
Let
I-
me just
can I
say,
go
it was
back to that?
AG. It was the AG's office, right? They should have known from the get-go that they could not represent, that they had a conflict in that situation. So that early on, the Attorney General's office, they knew the second time. They should have known the first time. They should have done their due diligence to know that they had a conflict before announcing that situation. The governor's response could have been better, no question about it. She could have leaned into her workforce, right? Because that's our responsibility, is leaning into our workforce, figuring out what the issues are and resolving the issues, right? Working with them to resolve the issues. Nobody was focused on the solutions to what the concerns were.
And what's clear?
I'm sorry. Yeah, I just want to say that the governor's response too has to take into account the humanitarian crisis that took place in the last 3 weeks in our facilities because of potentially not working with the union sooner and stuff like that. Because there were incarcerated individuals who were locked in their cells 24 hours a day for 24 days straight with bunkies in several facilities. They were getting inadequate food. There was no medical attention whatsoever. My son required medical attention and was denied to the point where he almost died. There's no mental health attention that was going on, and her response has to carry on past this discussion right here, but to the trauma that has now been caused or added to the last 3 weeks from people who have been experiencing mental health issues, not getting their mental health care, not, having access to, being able to see their loved ones and their family members. My son missed, and I know correctional officers go through this as well, but, his niece turned 4, and we always go and visit, and I see my son every week. My son has family every week. We sit in those visiting rooms every week, and I see fathers holding their children. I see grandparents playing cards with their loved ones. I see weddings. I see engagements. These things happen in those visit rooms, and they need to be opened now. And the governor needs to address the issues on the employee side, but she also needs to pass legislation that brings home people sooner to their families and their communities.
What's clear after all these discussions, there's a lot of issues facing New York's correctional system, and I hope this is just the first of many conversations we'll have to find real solutions to this issue.
Yeah, and thanks so much for coming on, all of you. We did invite Doc's representative. We did invite NYSCOBA, the union. They declined at this time, but this is a very lively group, a very passionate group, and we'd love to have you guys back if you want to do this again sometime.
It was really nice talking to you all.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us, and thanks
guys
for joining this session as well. And like Brianna said, let's keep this conversation going.
Yeah.